Okay, guys, we're going to part two here, and if you haven't seen part one, go to the very end of this, and it'll be in your top right-hand corner. This won't go to an extra part, although I'm going to show you some other stuff after the brief amount that's left after this. We've been talking about how Phaethon wanted to ride his father's chariot, much like the story of Icarus, and he drove too close to the earth and burned it up, whereas Icarus got too close to the sun. In this variation that we're telling, or at least I'm leading into the thoughts that are all attached to it, it seems that at first, in a lot of the tales, but not all, he goes away from the earth at first, making it get cold, and then instantly comes back, burning up the earth. And this might have something to do with the Ypunger Dryas event. For it is a telltale sign where we were coming out of the last ice age and then all of a sudden got driven into another deep ice age and back up out of it. And in this story we've just told, and so I'll say it again, Phobos, the sun god, was stricken with grief at his son's death. At first refused to resume his work at driving his chariot, so the sun wasn't coming back out for a while. Is this a nuclear winter type thing? Are we attaching two things together, or is there a correlation to an event like this? Is it talking about an elder time, or is it talking about a recent time? Is it relating something of an elder time and something that happened more recently, deifying somebody like the Greeks and Romans were known to do, and attaching it to a story of an elder time like Atlantis and these elder stories that are around? And it seems to be. Let's look at this next part. It's quite telling. According to Clement of Alexandria in his Stromata, which is a compilation of just kind of cleanup stories and things like that, having to compile Christianity and refine it, by the way. In the time of Crotopus occurred the burning of Phaethon and the deluges of Deucalion. Now, Deucalion is the one that made it through the flood. It is kind of the Noah counterpart, if you will. So if they're telling you that this happened and that happened at the same time, this might lead another phase of you seeing that there was a meteoric type event that looked like the sun came out during the day and struck the ground, and everything went dark for a period of time and came back out of it. We don't know a length of time, but that's a decent assumption that we can make out of it. Did it happen at night? Did it happen just a hair too early in the morning and look like the sun came up and whoa, it went crazy and boom, and then caused such a ruckus that whenever the sun came up, it never really came up that day, and for a long time after caused a bit of a problem? Well, it's possible. But what's odd about this is what we're talking about is Clement of Alexandria. Now, Clement of Alexandria is actually Titus Flavius Clemens. And so now we have that Titus Flavius background here, attaching it to the story here. And that's going to be kind of critical in a few points. He was a Christian theologian and philosopher who taught at the Catechetical School of Alexandria. A convert to Christianity, he was an educated man who was familiar with classical Greek and philosophy literature, and what he ended up doing was reconnecting it back together. But then, so we have ideas of Titus Flavius put in a name into somebody that's attaching to this story again of this four-horse charioted person. So is this an echoing? Is this that typology type situation that we've heard of before in connectives? And being that this is kind of the Josephus of his day a little bit, is this telling also in Clemens? For that goes right with that too, and Clement and the Pope named such, and we talk about clemency and what it means, and there's clementine apples, but or clementine oranges. What does that have to do with it all? What's different about a clementine? My darling clementine. So let's look into this a little further. In the 12 Caesars, Suetonius attributes the Emperor Tiberius the following repeated remark about the future Emperor Gaius Caligula. He says that to allow Gaius to live would prove the ruin of himself and all men, and that he was raising a viper for the Roman people and the Phaethon for the world. So he called him that he was going to be a destroyer. He was going to ruin everything that they had got going on. And so this is Caligula, and you know about what happened during the time of Caligula, and there's stories and everything of it. But he was the son of the Roman general Germanicus and Augustus's granddaughter Agrippina the elder. And this is what gave him an end to do this. He was also the grandnephew of the one that had come before him, right? So Caligula was born to the first ruling family of the Roman Empire, conveniently known, or conventionally, but conveniently known as the Judeo-Claudian dynasty. And I could just start going off now about how this connects to the Bible and the lead in off of that, but this story here ought to show you enough of connections of it, but also it seems to be connecting to a meteor strike and something that caused a hell of a lot of ruckus in ancient times. Now, it talked about how he burned up Africa, and that's why it looks that way. And are they recanting back to whenever it was green? Back in the Green Sahara, 6,000 BC, and coming out of that, and then it went away, and something happened. There's that sea of glass that's there, but they say that's tens of millions of years old. I think 26 million years old or something they put it at. So that sea of glass that's there is probably not the indicator, but did something happen along that line? Did something happen, well, not there, but over in Europe more? Way over in Britain someplace, and it took out a place. Well, we recently talked about a giant boat dock that's there that's 30 foot below the water at the time, and it's 8,000 BC. So this could be pivoting in that same time frame that they're talking about, and then something extremely dramatic happened. And hopefully whenever they go into this dig, they'll get some more information out of it, and I'd like to see what maybe fell off that dock in ancient times, if anything they could find. Fragments of Euripides' tragedy on this subject suggest that on this account, Phaethon survives. In reconstructing the lost play and discussing the fragments, James Diggle has discussed the treatment of Phaethon myth. In the true history of the satirical Greek writer Lucian, Phaethon is king of the sun and is at war with the moon. And so this is giving it a connected planetary situation, and you'll see other connections to the planet. There's a lot of these, and you could read these and stuff. I guess what I want to see, let's see. Hauptmann's long poem Helios and Phaethon omits the cosmic disaster in order to focus on the relationship between the godly son and godly father and mortal son. So there's a godly father and an all too mortal son. Now, the first inklings of Christ that you get, if you look at the Nag Hammadi's text and the other, it was looked at as quite different, and perhaps he's even just a prophet type of person or something along that line, and they're trying to fit it in. And it seems like really he wasn't supposed to have necessarily been that sun god, but he was just merely meant to point towards the second coming of himself, because that's when it was going to kick off. And the second coming is exactly at, well, it started in the year 66 AD and went for 7 years to 73 AD. Yeah, and that's 7 years of trials and tribulations, and then in 73 AD, no stone left standing, abomination of desolation, everything. Josephus even talks about 3 men on crosses, and they took him down. One was dead, one died shortly after, and one miraculously lived. And if you want to start having pointers like that, it just keeps going on. He tells you a story of a woman named Mary whenever they were being starved out, trapped around it with a wall up around, just like Jesus has said too, that a woman named Mary sacrificed her only son that she had, said that he would be a myth of the world whenever they would keep him alive through Passover, because after Passover, God would come and save them all. Well, they ended up killing themselves before Titus ran in, but who ran in on the white horse was Titus. And so it kind of showed you that. And that 66 AD starting point, it supposedly happened in the 6th month on the 6th day. And for those who have wisdom, count the number, for it's a human number. Right? They talk about heroes epitomizing man's revolt against world order, against human destinies, and so on. But there's more to this. Goodman juxtaposes Phaethon myth with a grotesque version of a Christological narrative. Wow, I bet that's what I'm kind of inferring here too. So it has another connective to it. Okay, so mythical about so shared names. Now this is telling too when we get into it, and we talked about all the different gods and so on. The name Phaethon, which means shining one, very much like phosphorus means Lucifer, means bright and shining one, a bright and shining morning star, which this guy was in the morning star, and how quickly he fell to the ground. It describes falling to the earth like a star, like a lightning bolt. That's a connection that they put in that Lucifer, son of the morning, isn't it? This shining one was given also to Phaethon, who is son of Eos in the other representation of it, with that son of Eos to one of the horses of Eos, which is Dawn, son of the morning, the sun, the constellation Origo, which is an odd constellation. It's said to be the chariot, and then sometimes the Big Dipper is like a cart or a wagon, and so on. And these stories can be shown as zodiacal and go round and around. It's one of 88 monitored constellations. It's among the 48 constellations that was listed by the 2nd century astronomer Ptolemy. Right. It's north of the celestial equator. Its name in Latin is for the charioteer, so Auriga. And the planet Jupiter. Right? And we talked about that for Phaethon, but let's continue. While as an adjective it was used to describe the sun and the moon. So now we're talking about planetary objects, but also everything connects to the sun and sun worship, and these things are lesser deities to them. And so it works in this conjunctive, and the same thing with the Father and the Son, right? No matter which pantheon or theogony you go in. Isn't that amazing? So in some accounts, the planet referred to by this name is not Jupiter, but Saturn. Oh, snap. In modern times, an asteroid whose orbit brings it close to the sun has been named 3200 Phaethon after a mythological Phaethon. The French form of the name of Phaeton is Phaeton. This form of the word is applied to a kind of carriage and automobile, and I've talked about that and the gangster car and things when I was a kid, but even goes back to like Model A's and squared off cars and a style of body type anyhow. And it's also an order, family, and genus of birds named Phaethon. Their taxonomic nomenclature, tropic birds, and if you look at this, it's like shorebirds and things like that they thought might have been weird variations like seagulls and even pelicans and so on, but they know they're not, and everything. They're more of a swift type of bird or something along that line. So here's the marble statue that they have of him also here at from Paris, and I believe it's the Albert Museum, the Victorian Albert Museum. bam, upside down, and like he had just fallen, smack. And it shows pieces of the zodiac around him, the sun falling, right? And whenever we talk about the sun falling, is this whenever the earth goes through that pivot to where it's no longer leaning north during the winter, but it's leaning south during the winter, and it goes to a pivot. Now, it doesn't do this in a rapid state that we found in any way, but if it did it rapidly, like it started wobbling and then flopped over, and that interim, whether that takes a year, 10 years, or a decade, is going to be quite a hell of a thing, just like going into the next ice age is. Now let's look at one more piece of data here real quick, and I hope it doesn't fail on me. So here's an example how whenever it gets a high pressure onto it because of the heat, how it does suck the moisture over it, and especially whenever we're leaning the other way, it makes that effect. This is a guy's video that was talking about how the Sahara changed, and whenever it was a green Sahara coming out of it, how it was very much like the monsoon areas and would green up through the seasons.
But water taken up by plants isn't actually used by the plant at all, but rather...
Now you see the mist that's around rainforest, and that's emitting mist around it, and you can tell that once you get a little bit of it going around the side of it, that them creating their own mist will help to make it to grow. And it won't take but just a little bit more rain and you've got it, you know? And it will do this complete cycle situation in bringing on mist, where it brings additional water, brings vegetation, brings greater groundwater withdrawal, more vegetation on the ground, holding it on, and then exasperating it, and able to tap off of the ground table water that's there. That causes increased transpiration, which is their respiration. Think of it as the sweat of a tree, really, but it's different. For its respiration, it's breathing out a lot of moisture. We do too, by the way. And that brings additional water, which brings it about, and it starts to make this vicious circle of life type of thing. So when we look at the last maximum that was going on, what we'll find is there were some great lakes around here, and Lake Chad is down here, and it's huge. It's as big as any lake on Earth. And while at the peak of the last ice age, there was a lot of green up here. At just some 14,000 years ago, it was much lower, and in fact it goes 200 miles even further than this shows into the yellow. The green fades to what this looks like is the start of scrublands, and this spot, which is really spot, becomes a piece that's not much bigger than maybe 2 of my pointers, with the map being this big. And so before it turned green, there was a time that it wasn't so green. Now, whenever it did turn green, the Namib Desert was still dry always, and there's very little water ever shown from that. But whenever it did turn green through this event, it ended up growing to the size that you see today during this point turning green, and then it shrunk back to the size that we see today. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 7,000 years ago, it could have swelled to the point of this whenever it was green Sahara, and then would have faltered back down to where it is today. And this is caused by the Earth being tilted toward the planet or away from the planet of the sun during what is our winter. And we're just starting to understand these complex cycles that go on with this, and the fact that we have an oval orbit around the sun slightly, and then it comes back to being almost circular and then pulls back out to oval. And Jupiter and Saturn seem to play in this effect, so it's not something we can exactly say is gonna happen and gonna stay. For if it's oval and going back, but it gets pulled here we go extending it, and so it goes through these odd cycles. And of course, each of these planets cycling around go in 12 and 20 year cycles, as I talked about, and that makes it quite strange. Anyhow, so there's a connection here where this sun that's way far away from the Earth and nowhere near as close as that strove across here too close to the land and burnt up the land, and it said what turned black people black. So in other words, not getting tanned, but it just cooked them. It said the effect was as if they were bruised all over their body from it, because it pooled their blood up to their skin and turned it dark. And that's not at all how that happens, and that's not really how tanning happens either. So it's an odd telling, but we clarified on Ethiopia and the situations. But now whenever the Green Sahara was going on, Spain was dry like it is now, but in between it got back going pretty good. And so we're realizing now we're about 5,000 to 8,000 years before it apexes or cusps and comes back into leaning the other way. And when we do, peaking at about 13,000 years from now, it'll actually be more of a Green Sahara. But also there's another toggle point for the ice age is overdue, kinda, looking at the scale of it. And if that kicks off, well, doesn't that just change everything? Anyhow, guys, like, share, and subscribe and enjoy. But does this mean that some asteroid had hit way up here, or perhaps in the Tartarus area before? Maybe out over here, and maybe it was what killed off the Atlas Mountains in Atlantis and ruined that area? Did it hit out here in the ocean and cause a back tidal wave that inundated and went all through that area and washed the people away? And what did happen? For they recant Deucalion and their great flood to this same time on more than one occasion, and a great catastrophe. But there's also biblical connections there too. Down in the comments, write what you think about it, and maybe each or any of the things and topics and variations that we talked about there. I could go about another hour going another way on it and actually talking about a couple of those books and what they were saying about things, and more esoteric, but I think this wraps up a lot more clear of points. Like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy. Peace.